Welcome everyone to the platform. I'm so excited to see everyone on here. And we are here to talk about a very important issue. Okay? We lost a brother, George Floyd. You all saw it. It was televised. You all saw how the brother's life was taken from him senselessly. You all saw it. And of course, we know that the reason why this time things are different is because of the fact that, one, his hands were tied behind him in handcuffs. He was helpless. And two, he had a knee. There was a knee on his neck, a knee that crushed his neck, a knee that wouldn't listen to him or to those on the sidelines and those who were beckoning on the police to leave him. And the knee took his life, choked him to death. And many of us Africans in the US, Africans on the continent, Africans in Brazil, Africans in the Caribbean, Africans in Europe, all over the world saw this, and it looked so familiar. It struck a chord on us. It struck a chord with us because we have been screaming help for a long time, just like our brother George Floyd was screaming for help. Oftentimes we've been marginalized, we've been rejected, oftentimes we've been pushed aside, we've been discriminated against, and we cry foul, and no one tends to listen until this thing happened, and it was televised. Now everyone is jumping on the bandwagon saying, yes, we need to change things around here. I have to say this, when I first moved to the US from Nigeria, I was a freshman, that was in 2001. I remember actually being pulled over by a cop, and he had asked for something of me. I think it was either registration or insurance. And I was reaching to my phone. My phone was on my dashboard. I was reaching to my phone to call a friend to bring it over to me. And he pulled a gun on me. And I was new. I was a newbie in the US. I didn't know all these. In fact, I've actually come to learn about this police brutality that exists here in the US since I've been here. I've learned so much about the African American culture. And we need to understand that the experiences that we have as Africans will differ depending on where we are. So in America, there is what is called redlining, where politicians would mark a line around the neighborhood. And once they mark that line around that neighborhood or around that zip code, it's a signal to investors, to banks, to different entities not to deal favorably with that neighborhood. So you have Africans who live in these neighborhoods not getting access to, not having access to loans to buy homes. They don't get loans to start businesses. Okay. That's the injustice that has been happening here. I mean, we can go on and on. We see huge injustice in the healthcare system in the US. Okay. Huge injustice in the education system in the US. It is mind-boggling, where a state would appropriate funding based on the zip codes and the neighborhoods. Okay? And that is affecting our people. It's affecting Africans who live in these poor neighborhoods. Yes, because they don't pay as much taxes, they get poor education or inadequate education. So George Floyd's death reminded us of all these injustices that's been happening. If you go to Brazil, the same thing. How many of you know that there are over 90 million Africans living in Brazil? Do you know that? Over 90 million Africans in Brazil. And you would think that the government will do a great job at tapping into these human resources bringing them into education, into the education sector, into the business sector. But no, a lot of them are suffering. Many of them are suffering. They don't have access to proper health care. They don't have access to proper education. The same thing. Our story is the same thing. Everywhere you go. In Africa itself, the same story. Even on the continent, the same story. You know, our minerals are not being used to take care of our citizens. We have folks, foreigners who come in with greed and they take minerals. In Nigeria, they come in with the fact Shell had done some news around this where they went on an apology tour, apologizing to folks that live in the Niger Delta area. I see if the apology will help and fix years and years of injustice. They come in, they pollute the environment. They devastate the environment. People are forced to leave their communities. The fishes and the wildlife die because of pollution. These are things that would never happen in the United States or in Europe, but they do it with impunity. They do it with impunity, and they take the resources and leave the people high and dry. That's just an example. It's happening everywhere. So African people all over the world saw what happened to George Floyd, and it's like, we were like, no, not again, not again. It's time for us to stand up. It's time for us to mobilize. It's time for us to do something. And that was one of my motivations for starting this university. Because I have been privileged to travel. And typically I would travel for other things, for work or for pleasure. But I kept seeing this injustice everywhere I go. People who look like me were suffering. I was like, wait a minute, this is wrong. Now, in my humble opinion, that knee that crushed George Floyd's neck symbolizes the external factor working against Africans. That's the symbolism. And that's why it hit a nerve on so many Africans. And of course, we also appreciate the non-Africans who've come as allies to speak with us, to stand with us. We appreciate that, of course. But it does struck a nerve. Okay? There are several external forces, and I just highlighted a few of those. Maybe you can even share some. Okay? That was one of the main reasons why we started this university, to start teaching people how to liberate themselves, how to remove these knees that are crushing on our necks. Okay, that's number one thing. But then I also realized, again, in my humble opinion, that Africans are not tapping into their highest potential. Africans are like a sleeping giant. That's something else that I noticed, because throughout the regions that I have been to, I saw enormous potential in these Africans, but they were doing nothing about it. That's my submission. And again, I'm welcome to someone to challenge me. I think Africans are not applying themselves as they should. That's the second point. Point number one, of course, there is huge injustice brought against us by external factors. I mean, there are stories about Africans being sold into slavery today, in this day and age. So there is no question about that. But second point is that we are not doing enough. We are not doing enough. So the reason for the university is to serve as a catalyst to awaken the sleeping giant, to awaken us, to remind us of who we are, to remind us of where we come from, to remind us that we are from a royal people. We are from a good stock. We come from a wonderful tradition, and we have forgotten about that. We come from a people who practice Ubuntu. I was just having and an argument with one of my very wonderful brothers a couple of hours ago. And he's an academic just as I am, and sometimes we like to argue over minutiae, very small things, and we make big things out of it. So we were arguing about the idea of Ubuntu, and again, that's how we make a living as academics. We argue, right? So his idea of Ubuntu was basically, he was saying that different things that you have, there are things here that you have to do that will lead you to spirituality. And then having that spirituality helps you reach Ubuntu, which is the ideal of loving each other, the ideal of community, of oneness. Okay, so his idea is, if you have good family values, for example, or if you are introspective, if you are reflective, if you meditate, if you go to places of worship to connect with people, doing things that would help you become spiritual. So you have these activities that helps you become spiritual, and then that spirituality helps you attain Ubuntu. So that was his line of thought. My position was, no. My position was, Ubuntu is in of itself being spiritual. Okay? Because we both understand and agree that spirituality is about connecting, interconnectedness. I am in you and you are in me. We are together, right? Spirituality is about me looking out for you as a human being, because you are just a human being, and that's enough for me to look out for you. I don't need anything else. I don't need an instruction or a command to do that for you. That is, and so my argument was that by me just reaching out to you and thinking about you, talking good about you or saying nice things about you, and performing actions to help you, those things become my ritual, and those things allow me be a spiritual person. And by living out Ubuntu, I am being spiritual. So basically, I'm saying spirituality is Ubuntu, and he's saying spirituality leads to Ubuntu. For me, it's a trivial point, very, very trivial. But the most important thing is, Africans have this philosophy of Ubuntu that we have forgotten. Why am I bringing up this? I'm bringing this up because we need to take the knees off our necks. How do we do it? Again, two things that we need to do, and I'll open it up to the floor. First, we need to come together and make some demands. We need to come together and push back, which is what is happening today. We see the movement. In fact, again, I cannot tell you how greatly I am moved, just as many of you, by the turn of events, by how many people, even non-Africans, who have joined the movement. So we need to continue to do that. But there's something else that we need to do, and we shouldn't forget. And it seems like we're not doing that enough. That's number two thing that we need to do. We need to start practicing Ubuntu again within our community. We need to come together. We need to support each other. One of the main reasons why Africans all over the world, wherever you might see them, in my humble opinion, are not thriving is because Africans are not working together. Yes, in the United States, even though there's a lot of factors working against Africans in these zip codes or in these neighborhoods, I don't see a lot of Africans coming together. I mean, it's happening, but we can do more of it. We can do more of it. We can support each other. We can build schools. Why not? We talk about the schools not catering to our needs, not teaching our culture. We only have 1 month reserved for Black History Month in the US. The rest of the year, we don't teach anything about Black history. It means that an African child grows up in this country, they don't get to really appreciate who they are and learn about themselves. They don't do that. So you can go from kindergarten all the way through the university. You don't really learn about your culture in the United States and even in Africa. And that is what we are changing at the university. And I also think is actually not just bad for the African child or the African person not to learn about the African traditions, but it's also bad for the non-African. Because let's take, for example, the European Americans in this country, in the US, they don't learn about Africans at all, right? So what do you think would happen to them? What do you think their psychology looks like? Well, they've been through an education where they only see themselves as champions, as pioneers. They don't see anybody else. They don't see Africans. They don't learn that civilization began in Africa. They don't learn that. They don't learn that humans began in Africa. They don't learn that. They don't learn about Ubuntu. They don't learn about all the innovations and the innovators from Africa. So when they see an African person, they've been wired for years to look down upon them. And it contributes to racism. And we are shocked, right? So we need to start organizing and doing for ourselves. Do you try to find some businesses to support around your area? Do you give advice to a startup around your area? Do you mentor a child in your area? So I hope that we would live here. I want us to think about one singular act that we can perform when we live here today. Okay? One singular act of Ubuntu, of kindness, that we can perform to another African to show some love when we live here today. And hopefully we can propagate that. So I'm going to stop there.